Butch Spears, and I live in Henderson, Nevada. And this is my wannabe Myers Manx. It's a Dune Buggy. It's a 1973 standard pan. And it had an old raggedy body on it when I bought it. I went back home. I was born in Colorado, and I went back home for a family visit. And a friend told me about it, and so I went and looked at it, and the body was in really bad shape and a pan, so basically I just had a rolling chassis. And I bought it for $500 and brought it home. And that's where I got started. And so I decided that I tore everything down, cleaned everything up. The pan was in great shape, but I decided that I wanted to double layer it because I knew I'd be going out in the dirt. And so the pan is about an inch deep. It's got 16 gauge steel on the bottom for the second layer, and in between the two it's got 3/4 inch square tubing laid on a diagonal. And while I was at it, I welded in some threaded plates where the body bolts would normally go, so I wouldn't have to use those silly washers that Volkswagen had. I got my pan all done and got it coated, and then I started on the transmission. It was fine. I just needed to put in new rubber baby buggy bumpers and beef up the suspension, check the torsion arms and redo those, reset them, put new bushings in them, and then it had the chance to sit for a little bit because now I have a body I don't know if I can fix or not. So as it turned out, that body was pretty hairy. So I turned it upside down, and the bottom side was better than the top. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna make it a mold. Because it was a 4-place instead of a 2-place, it's a full-length pan. So that took me about 6 months, and I turned that into a mold. And I had a friend that was familiar with it. He come down and he was pointing things out to me, what I needed to do. And it took me about 6 months. And our first car that we laid up in it, it stuck, of course. And the first 3 stuck pretty bad. And then this car is about the 21st car out of the mold. And I decided that that was the car I wanted because it didn't stick and it looked pretty good and I liked the color. And so now I have a body, I have a way of measuring things and what I needed to do and build a roll cage. And so the roll cage is 1.5 inch round tubing, 0.95 in thickness, and it's all welded up by me. I did all of the work. I designed it on a computer at first because I didn't want a garage wall or a floor full of bent tubes that I didn't want to use. And so once I decided on how I wanted to do it, I bought me a tubing bender, which was what a 4-square manually operated bender. And that's how I made that. And I didn't do any work on the engine because if I knew I built an engine, I knew I'd get in it and drive it and never finish the car. So I didn't do the engine till very last. I went through the front end, put in new torsion springs in the upper and lower front axle. Here again with new bushings, spacers, wheel bearings. I went with disc brakes on the front. On the rear, I stayed with drum because I also have hydraulic turning brakes. So it's all incorporated in the hydraulic system of the brakes. And the drum brakes, I stayed with them mainly because the cable-operated emergency disc brake was so doggone expensive at the time. So I said, I'll just put discs on the front. Suspension is pretty much stock. I did, however, reinforce the rear swing arms. They're welded up with a piece of 1/2-inch rod laid on the top part and on the bottom part to reinforce that so it don't bend or break. I drilled holes in the very back bushing so I could use a grease gun to grease up the bearings. And it's got air shocks on it. And now the air shocks are aired up individually because air will transfer from one side to the other in a turn, and that's bad. So if I air them up individually, they kind of work a little bit more like a torsion bar, so it stays right where it's supposed to. I also have air shocks on the front. It's a ball joint front end. And on your shock towers, I had to go down from the top down about halfway and cut a 1-inch wide piece of pie out of that shock tower and pull it back. And by doing that and then re-welding it, it gave me room for a bigger round shock for my air shocks, and I had clearance. They too are aired up individually. I bought me a set of wheels by this time, decided what I wanted. I just didn't care for anything that Volkswagen or Porsche had because I wanted something different. So I bought some Chevrolet adapters. These are 4 3/4 on 5. They're Chevy wheels, and they're still on there, and I like them. And they're a good heavy aluminum wheel. They're not really thin, and they're a 7-inch wide rim on the front and an 8-inch wide rim on the back. The tires on the front are 195 15s, and the tires on the back are P250 60R radials. So they're BF Goodrich, and I'm on my 3rd set of tires right now. Okay, now the engine. The very first engine was completely stock, and I did smog for a while, and then I decided, it couldn't get smog done too much anymore, so I'm going to build myself an engine. I built a 1914 cc engine. When I was building it with stock rods, I found that I came up with over 100 thousandths deck height, which I didn't like because I wanted to kind of spruce it up a little bit. So I bought 5.5 rods as opposed to stock 5.3 rods. That brought me to TDC. Now I can shim up and get the clearance I want. So I gave it 35 thousandths clearance. And the reason I went with 35 is because I don't know this for a fact, but everybody tells me this, that like in a long pull on a sand hill at full bore, you get rod stretch of at least 30 thousandths. So I didn't want to beat the ring glands out of it by not having enough space. It's got 10-to-1 compression ratio. It is got an angle cam in it. It's just a little 110. I didn't want to go too radical. I got 125 ratio rockers. I got chrome moly pushrod tubes. I got straight cut cam gears. I have an oil, it's like a baffle that you can put in. It's to keep your oil from splashing all over the place. It kind of keeps it in one spot. So that's in the crankcase as well. The heads, they are, what they call them. Anyway, they're a mild sand drag head. They got the deep plugs. They're the little, I call them peanut plugs. They're 3/4 inch deep plugs. They have 40 intakes, stainless steel, 35.5 exhaust, stainless steel. all on a 3-cut valve grind.
See?
The exhaust pipes are duals, which I love the sound of it. It sounds a little different than any other Volkswagen out there. However, the chrome pipes that were on it, the mufflers, they just didn't do it. So I ended up buying some stainless steel mufflers, and I put it on there, and it looks better, it sounds better. And I wrapped them in exhaust wrap just to maintain a certain amount of heat. The engine has a Weber 44 single carburetor. I also rebuilt that complete. The intake manifold, as opposed to normal carburetor geometry and cable reduction, I cleaned all that off and polished it down at that time, and I went with an over-the-top cable like a motorcycle. That done away with all of the geometry, figuring out, going through the fan shroud business. So mine comes over the top and hooks in just like a motorcycle, and pull up on it and we go. We don't have to adjust anything. The push rods I set at 0 clearance when I built this thing. I have never adjusted them since, and that's been 10 years ago. And the reason that works out is because of the expansion ratio between aluminum and steel. Steel is much slower. Aluminum is much faster. But steel, if I set them at 0 clearance, then I don't have to worry about 6/1000ths and all of that. They don't rattle. I've never burned a valve, and I haven't adjusted them since. I have checked them to make sure everybody's okay. A distributor in it that I can set the RPM so I don't over rev it. It's a Flamethrower 3. It runs really well. I do not have a stock oil cooler. I have what they call the power shroud, which slopes down on one side, and I have 2 fan-operated oil coolers on it, one under each fender on the rear with an air scoop on each side. And the first one of the coolers comes on when I start the car. The second cooler is manually operated switch. So I can run 80, 85 miles an hour all day long out here in the desert heat and not get over 190. I've already proved that to myself, and by doing that, with the extra hose, with the 2 oil coolers, I now have a 5-quart oil capacity system. This is my second windshield in this windshield frame, but I had to measure. It was 43 3/4, I believe. I might be wrong on that. But I sloped it just a little bit more than a lot of them do, which I strictly for looks. The seats came out of a 1984 Subaru, and I reupholstered those. The soft top I made. I did all the upholstery. I did the body, I did the frame and the pan. I built the engine. I did all the electrical. Speaking of, all of my electrical has set up with self-setting circuit breakers. No fuses to worry about, or having the wrong fuse or trying to hunt down, because it'll cool down and it'll click back on and I'm on the road again. I also have shut-offs on my fuel pump. I was worried about theft. And I have a couple of switches that are hidden so nobody can just jump in the thing and crank it up and go away. So I'm out in the desert quite a bit, sometimes by myself. And I thought, what if I got in a bind, then I'd sunk. So I put a 2,500-pound winch on the front. The buggy only weighs 1725, so that's more than enough winch. It has a nylon winch rope instead of cable, and that's good for 12,000 pounds. And The oddity that I have here is 3 little chrome goodies on the body that everybody asks me what you got those on there for. One is I got a deck lid handle, and I have 2 cabinet pulls, kitchen cabinet pulls. And the reason for that is when I pull the hood, I put an endless loop around it and through that, and that's how I lift the hood off the body. Then I can get to all of my electrical, I can adjust the steering, I can do whatever I need to do on underneath the hood. These mirrors, I just acquired those. I never was happy with any of my mirrors. And these are a cheap $30 pair off of a pair of side-by-side type off-road vehicle, and I love them. The luggage rack, I did not make this. I bought it, but I did take 18 inches out of the center of it. And I got tape on here holding wires, but right here's where it went. And I just slid it together. I didn't want to weld it because it's powder coated. So I got to my length that I wanted. The back seat, as you can see, I'm going to go around the other side. This is metal, sheet metal that I cut out of the body so I could lower the back seat, and it sits in there like a regular VW. And this is like the space behind the back seat in a regular Volkswagen, so I carry all of my tools and get by stuff in there. They're locked down on both sides. So that's my trunk. The roll cage is, I said before, 1.5 inches. I did not say chrome moly. It is 1.5 inches, 095 chrome moly. So there's 2 center pieces that are welded together clear across over the head. I have 2 center bars going down the front, and then the back comes around like you see, and everything mounts down on the floor on sled runners, you might call it. That piece of rectangular tubing runs full length of the floor, and that's what this is welded to. And so it was bolted down at the same time the body was bolted down, so all the bolts are holding the roll cage and the body together, holding it down to the pan. These are sprint bars. They are also 1.5 inches, but these are only 0.65, simply because in the event I get T-boned or something happens, these will crush and save my body instead of something so strong that it just bends up my frame. And I've already proved that, so I had to build a new one for the other side. So yeah, 0.65 for something you want to crush to save the rest of the car is what you want to use. I designed this, well, I have seen them built, the rear engine cradle in this fashion, but you can't buy them, you have to build them. And so underneath the back seat is a subframe that I built that the engine cradle bolts to, as well as the horns on the bottom. So it has built-in trailer hitch that raises and hides if I want to, and it doesn't stick out so far. And the engine's a little bit dirty right now. You kind of caught me by surprise. I wasn't expecting this, but I believe in an oil pressure gauge and manual oil pressure, and this thing runs about 40 pounds at an idle and about 60 pounds running. So I run 20 W50 It runs real good. It really does. This is what they call an oil catch can. And what that does, instead of I have a positive crankcase ventilation. And so I'm sucking fumes out of the crankcase, but I'm not sucking any oil out because this catches the oil first. And so I have positive air going into the crankcase. And out here in the desert in the wintertime, because of the ambient air being so moist, a lot of guys, I'm getting water in my oil. Why? How is this happening? Well, it's ambient air and a hot engine, and it condenses. This will also pick up the condensed moisture. These are just plastic gas cans, and 2.5 gallons on each side. These are backup lights only. And these are 6,000 watt HID lights on each light. These, I guess you would call them cowl lights, for the old cowling lights years ago. They're 50 watts a piece. These up here are 50 watts a piece. And then these are my happy face headlights.
We'll just do a couple loops down and around.
How was that?
That's pretty cool. So Butch, what is the fun factor of this vehicle while you're out driving?
Oh,
1 to 10.
1 to 10, fun factor with me is 10. I just love it. This is my therapy.